Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into a topic that's been blowing up my inbox lately, AI in banking. I'm really pumped to get into this, especially with all the stuff you've been sending me.
Yeah, it's definitely having a moment, right? And for good reason, too. It seems like every day there's some new headline about AI shaking things up and banking's right in the thick of it.
It really does feel that way.
Yeah.
So we're doing a deep dive today, taking a closer look at this article that landed on my digital doorstep. It really digs into how banks are trying to find that sweet spot, embracing the AI revolution without, losing their heads.
Yeah, that balancing act, it's fascinating, isn't it? And the article does a good job of showing how that tension is playing out in the real world. Like, take JP Morgan, for instance. They're consistently right up there on that evident AI index, meaning they're pouring resources into AI across the board.
They're leading the pack, basically, when it comes to adopting AI, right? But it's not just about throwing money at algorithms, is it? It sounds like banks are being pretty strategic about how and where they're actually implementing AI.
You hit the nail on the head. The article highlighted some really interesting use cases. One that jumped out at me was NatWest and their chatbot, Cora. It's handling millions of customer conversations, which frees up their human staff to deal with the really tricky stuff. Actually, the article said Cora handles almost half of those conversations without any human intervention at all.
11 million conversations last year. I mean, that's mind-blowing. That's a pretty amazing example of how AI can streamline things on a massive scale. It makes me think about how ING is using AI to personalize their customer emails now. Can you imagine getting marketing messages that are actually relevant to you, your own spending habits, your interests? That's powerful stuff.
It really is. And it gets to the core of what AI is good at, crunching huge data sets to spot patterns and make predictions that would take us humans, forever. But of course, there's two sides to every coin, right?
I mean, it's almost hard to wrap your head around, but it's not all rosy, right? There are definitely some serious things to consider when we're talking about AI, especially in banking.
Absolutely. It's like with any powerful tool, right? You got to be careful how you use it. And the article definitely didn't shy away from the potential downsides. Banks are really aware of the risks here.
For sure. And they brought up a few things that really got me thinking, like, what about just how customers perceive all of this? People might not be so comfortable with AI making big decisions about their money, especially if there's no human oversight.
It's a valid concern, and it kind of ties into this whole issue of bias in AI. One of the big challenges is that these AI models can actually pick up and amplify the biases that are already present in the data they're trained on.
That makes sense, though, right?
Yeah.
You can't really expect an AI to be more objective than the information it's been fed.
Yeah.
Garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
Exactly. If the data is flawed, the AI is going to be flawed, and that could lead to some seriously bad outcomes. We're talking unfair treatment, discrimination, the whole nine yards.
And it's not even just about bad data leading to bad decisions. This whole idea of hallucination that the article mentioned, that's kind of freaky, if you ask me.
I know, right? It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. But it's a real issue with AI, especially with these super sophisticated language models that some banks are starting to use.
Large language models, they called them, right? To be honest, I need a bit of a refresher on what those are exactly.
Sure thing. Think of them like chatbots, but on steroids. They can understand and generate human-like text in a way that's scarily convincing. The problem is that they can also just make stuff up. They can create information that sounds totally plausible, but it's completely fabricated.
Whoa, hold on. So the AI is literally making things up, like out of thin air.
You got it. And the scary part is it can be so convincing that even experts might have a hard time spotting the errors. It's like the AI has gone rogue.
Okay, yeah, that is more than a little unnerving.
Yeah.
So we're not just worried about AI making bad calls based on bad information, but also making decisions based on stuff that it completely invented.
Bingo. Imagine an AI system that's supposed to be looking for signs of money laundering. Now, what if it hallucinates a risk where none exists? That could lead to a perfectly innocent customer being investigated, having their accounts frozen, all because the AI made something up.
Okay, yeah. That's a really good example of why this stuff is so complicated. And it's not even just about fairness either, right? If their AI systems go off the deep end, banks are looking at huge legal problems, not to mention the hit to their reputation.
You're preaching to the choir. And on top of all that, we can't forget about the whole data privacy and security angle. I mean, banks are dealing with our most sensitive information, so anytime you bring AI into the mix, it's got to meet the absolute highest standards of data protection and compliance. No exceptions.
It's a lot, right? It does feel like we're talking about a whole new world of potential problems here. So how are banks even starting to deal with all of this? It feels like they're walking a tightrope, like one wrong step and it all goes wrong.
It's a great way to put it, actually, because one misstep could have huge consequences. But what I found really interesting in the article is that banks are definitely not oblivious to these risks. They're actually taking them very seriously, being proactive about mitigating them.
So they're not just like throwing caution to the wind and hoping for the best.
No, not at all. One of the things they're doing is building what they call guardrails into these AI systems. It's a way of keeping the AI on track, stopping it from going off the rails, so to speak. Basically, it's about controls and processes that are specifically designed to manage the risks.
Guardrails for AI. I like that. But what do these guardrails actually look like in practice? I mean, how do you actually put guardrails on an algorithm?
Well, it really depends on what the AI is being used for, but the article did give a couple of good examples, like NatWest has chosen to keep humans involved in a lot of the AI-driven processes, especially when it comes to the really big decisions. It's a way of balancing that AI efficiency with good old-fashioned human judgment.
So it's not about completely replacing humans with robots then. It's about finding that right balance.
Exactly. It's all about striking that balance. That seems to be the key takeaway here. ING is another good example. They've actually implemented a 20-step risk assessment process for any AI model before they even think about using it. 20 steps.
Wow. 20 steps. They aren't messing around.
Not at all. They're covering all their bases. Those steps cover everything you can think of. Data privacy and security, potential bias, the risks of the decisions the AI is making, ethical considerations. It's a really thorough approach.
That's good to hear, at least. It sounds like they're really trying to stay ahead of these problems before they become disasters. But the article did say that actually fixing bias, that's a particularly tough nut to crack, right? It's not something you can just do once and forget about it.
You're right. It's a constant work in progress. It takes constant attention, testing, and refining those models to make sure they're not perpetuating harmful biases. Even with the best of intentions, getting rid of bias entirely, that's a huge challenge.
So where does that leave us then? What's the takeaway for our listeners? What should people be keeping in mind as AI becomes more and more common in the financial world?
The million-dollar question, I think the most important thing to remember is that we're still in the early stages of all of this. It's a learning curve for everyone. Banks are excited, of course, about what AI can do, but they're also approaching it carefully, cautiously, which is a good thing.
That's what we want to see, right?
Absolutely. It's not about putting the brakes on progress, not at all. It's about making sure that progress happens in a responsible way that doesn't put fairness, security, or transparency at risk. And that requires everyone to work together. Banks, regulators, even the public, we all have a role to play.
It really feels like we've only just dipped our toes into this topic. There's so much more to uncover. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
It really has. But that's what makes it so interesting, right? There's always more to learn, always something new to discover. And as AI keeps evolving, it's only going to become more important to keep having these conversations, not just in banking, but in all parts of life.
Totally agree. Well, on that note, I want to say a huge thank you to you for joining me on this deep dive into the world of AI and banking. We've covered a lot of ground, but if you're hungry for more, and I know you are, we've got a link to the full article in our show notes. Make sure to check it out. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.